everything look cool. Everything's so much bigger.
It does. You can't really.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Greetings to all, and thank you for being a part of this event today. I am grateful to be here with you today and would like to thank the other speakers for their efforts as well. They've really done a terrific job. Let's have a round of applause for them and everybody that's helped make this happen. I mean, I am just staggered. I had no idea it was going to be like this. My name is Doug, and my presentation is titled The Superior Knowledge of the Ancient Egyptians. 20 ways and more that the ancient Egyptian elders display superior knowledge to anything found in the modern world. And I got a little ring here in the... Gonna have to get rid of that. Let's see what I can do. Our topics will include natural law, occulted knowledge, symbol and sign language, the religion of authority, esoteric religion, origins of the human race, the building of the Great Pyramids, and the solution. Today we will be discussing ancient psychology, mythology, the hero myth, as well as our lost histories and true origins as a species, and I intend to reveal some secrets of Coral Castle. I would offer that my credentials on these topics include appearances on Free Your Mind podcast series with Bill Church, which hosts many of the speakers from Free Your Mind Conference, including Richard Grove, Ross Ban, Android Jones, Fritz Springmeyer, Mark Passio, Frater X, and many, many others of their caliber. I have appeared on The Guy Next Door Speaks with Ivan from Phoenix and Metatron's Reality Hour with Zactron, which have hosted several respected speakers, including many from the Free Your Mind series, covering a wide range of topics from Egyptology to the mystery traditions and much more. Today's primary focus is our true origins as a species, and it is quite ambitious. Therefore, we will be moving rather quickly in dealing with advanced material. We will discuss the hero myth, mythology, ancient psychology, symbolism, and much more, if that wasn't redundant. If anyone is having trouble keeping up or feeling left behind, I want to encourage everyone to hang on for the journey. It should prove beneficial even for the novice student. Much of the material to be displayed today is for the advanced student, however. And because we are documenting it now, we will have the opportunity to revisit in accordance with the individual strides in supporting research. Today we are attempting to replace our modern historical timeline of roughly 5,000 years of civilization, or history in general, with a more accurate account of 500,000 years. We will show our true origins and evolution are directly connected with what we know in the modern world as Freemasonry, and why without knowledge of it, it is impossible to reconcile our cultural origins and restore the true timeline to our prehistoric past. Freemasonry, like Christianity, are the most ancient traditions in the modern world, and both are largely misunderstood. Very few, if any, have devoted such time and scientific research as is necessary to fully understand our material today. The ineptitude that exists in modern anthropology, archaeology, and geology is largely due to the lack of knowledge concerning what we know as the mystery traditions. If we arrive at the information without deeper insight, the information does not reveal anything new to us, and such is often the case. We are actually learning an ancient means of expression and preserving knowledge, which requires a great deal of occulted or hidden knowledge to understand and discern, the language of archetypes and symbolism. If I have seen farther than other men, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of geniuses. The pieces needed to understand this information have been scattered throughout the globe, requiring us to seek an eclectic number of resources to aggregate the fundamental fragments needed to restore our lost histories. Understanding the evolution of the Egyptian mythos, which has been preserved in Freemasonry, is the only means by which this feat is actually possible. Without the knowledge of our true origins, we got to believe whatever we are told. It is my contention that without this knowledge, we will not endure as a species. So we can get started now. So, truth. What is truth? Truth is objective, meaning that it is not based on the perceptions of human beings, which are capable of wavering. Truth is unwavering. It is simply that which is. It is that which has occurred in the past and that which is occurring in the present. Truth is singular. There's no such thing as my truth, his truth, or her truth. There is only the truth. There is only one way that things actually are, which exists separately and independent from human perception. Perception is not reality. Our work is the line to two. And we see that truth is the white line. It's linear. And, it's the research means we're more frequently intersecting with that linear truth. We can never align with it, but we can more frequently, and that raises our frequency of awareness. And you see the long wave, and then the shorter wave at the top with more frequent intersections. That's the point of that slide. And I'm going to keep moving fast like this. There are two ways, to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true. Soren Kierkegaard. Truth can never be told so as not to be understood and not be believed. William Blake. And Arthur Schopenhauer said, truth passes through three stages. In the first, it is ridiculed, or in the first, it is rejected. In the second, is ridiculed, and then the third is regarded as self-evident. Truth can never be destroyed, but humanity can be destroyed when we refuse to act in service of truth as her defenders. It is possible for us to co-create a positive outcome, but this can only be accomplished if we care enough to learn the truth ourselves and then develop the courage to continuously speak it to others. At the oracle here in Delphi in Greece, it says, know the self. Heed these words. You who wish to probe the depths of nature, if you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods. Consciousness. What is consciousness? The characteristics of a being generally regarded to comprise qualities such as subjectivity, self-awareness, sentience, sapience, and the ability to perceive the relationship between oneself and one's environment. Consciousness, the ability of a being to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to events taking place both within oneself and in the realm in which the self exists and operates. And consciousness, here again we're seeing this left brain model, the yin and yang, the masculine and feminine, the archetypal phallic, upright, triangle, equilateral, and the inverted yin, inverted equilateral triangle, which represents the chalice, and the masculine upright triangle represents the blade. So you have the chalice and the blade. And this brain model shows the left brain deals with analytical, logical, precise, repetitive, organized, detailed, scientific, detached, literal, and sequential type of thinking, and the right brain deals with and aspects of self. The right brain deals with creative, imaginative, generative, intuitive, conceptual, big picture, heuristic, empathetic, figurative, and irregular. So what is consciousness? The three aspects of the three expressions of consciousness are thoughts, emotions, and actions. And that can be described as emotions, the mother, the thoughts, the father, and then the action is the male child. And it's male because it's penetrative. And I have to move fast because I'm just showing you, these are prereqs to understand what we're really going to talk about. Again, here we have the brain model. The R complex or reptile brain deals with survival mode, base instincts, mammalian middle brain. The limbic brain deals with the emotions and is associated with the feminine, while the reptile is associated more with the masculine. And both of these are forms of animal consciousness. So, for us to fill our role in nature, we have to raise into the neocortex, the frontal neocortex, and where the higher order thinking takes place, and that can only be done when both those hemispheres are brought into balance. Our complex brain is associated with the Father God, law-obsessed dominator. The sacred feminine is associated with the Holy Spirit, and the frontal neocortex is associated with the Savior or the light of the world, the divine child. Okay, so what is the schism of the mind? In the left brain imbalance, typically we can lead to things like atheism, solipsism, where we see the world revolving around just our monad self, scientism, moral relativism, social Darwinism, which is like survival of the most ruthless, or natural selection, in the sense of our existence as a species, eugenics, and totalitarianism. Right brain imbalance would be associated with religion, unworthiness, self-loathing, addiction, order following, willing slave. And these are both forms of cognitive dissonance. So we need to bring these into balance in order to activate the higher order thinking. And I could break these slides down a lot more, but this is, again, just the prerequisite knowledge that we need to have to understand what we're going to talk about today. Another aspect of the worldview schism associated with left brain imbalance, the worldview associated with left brain imbalance is like the Big Bang Theory, which is associated with randomness. The universe is a grand accident. There is no underlying intelligence in nature. Natural law does not exist. Existence is purposeless. Hallmarks of atheism and scientism. And a right brain imbalance in the worldview schism is determinism. Preordained. God controls everything and every event in creation. All occurrences are preordained. Free will does not exist. Change is impossible, and action is meaningless. Hallmarks of religious extremism. Both of these worldviews omit free will. Free will is the random component, and natural law is the deterministic component. So it shows how critical it is to bring these things into balance. Okay, so what are the barriers to self-realization? We've got 4 here listed, and many of these slides here in the beginning and throughout the presentation I have taken from the What on Earth is Happening website, and using a lot of Mark Passio's slides. So I want to make sure and mention that today. The barriers to self-realization of the true self, capital S self. 5 sense illusion, ego identification, prison of the left brain, and institutionalized belief. So we have the 5 sense illusion, where we're limited in our understanding by what we can taste, smell, hear, see, and touch. And ego identification, I am my job, I am a mother, I am, a father, just roles we play is associated with the ego identification. More of the left, I am a doctor, it's just more left brain prison. Okay, so the ego identification, I got a little confused. So the left brain prison, what is the left brain prison? It's empiricism, strictly needing empirical scientific proofs to verify knowledge or how we come to understanding and agree on what actually is and what truth is, strictly from a left brain point of view. And there's so much more to say about the left brain prison, but it is a big obstacle that we need to be able to overcome. Institutionalized belief, of course, that it has to do with the religion of authority, and institutional is exclusive. So if you're not part of that institution, then you're excluded. There's a lot of dangers in that, and there's a lot of examples of institutionalized belief that do lead to a lot of harm in the world. So indoctrination is not education. Education is to move forward and to expand awareness and expand consciousness. So what is the lowercase self, monad self, versus the higher self actualization, the higher capital S self? The lower self is our physical being. The higher self is the spiritual aspect of our true self. So the lower case self exists in confusion and opposition, cannot envision true freedom, seeks only control, employs sorcery to bring accordance with egoic will, concerned only with oneself and one's own. Worldview reflects that a belief that everything exists in a state of separation, lives in a state of left brain ego identification, accepts and reinforces most institutionalized belief systems. And what is the true higher spiritual self? Exists in dominion and non-duality, understands and works toward true freedom, practices alchemy to bring about the true will, concerned with alleviating suffering for all. Worldview reflects the understanding that there is no separation between self and others, does not exist in left brain or ego identification, seeks to break down institutionalized belief systems. Okay, so to understand some of the things we're going to talk about, we need to talk about occulted knowledge. And because knowledge was occulted, may be the only reason that it is available today over the centuries, but it was also hidden, for nefarious reasons, to control others. So occult simply means hidden, from the Latin occultare, meaning to hide or to conceal. And every institution, it exists in a hierarchy, and this is compartmentalization. The lower levels do not know what is actually taking place in the higher levels, and this is accomplished through the hiding or occulting of knowledge. And like I say, I could break these slides down a lot more in depth, but I'm just showing you these are the prereqs that we need to understand. And honestly, we need to have initiated ourselves into all the arts and sciences, which means we took an interest in it and did some of our own work in the general curriculums, science and arts, to get to the deeper knowledge. We wouldn't want to try to study the mysteries without having already initiated ourselves into the arts and sciences, which are available to us in the modern world. And esoteric knowledge, it doesn't come looking for you. We have to seek it. We have to seek it out. And what was occulted knowledge, is now more in line with esotericism, because it is available, but, it's not going to come knocking on your door. So that's important to understand. It is important not to confuse esotericism with occulted hidden knowledge, but as I just said, esoteric knowledge must be discerned from that which has been occulted or hidden, and esoteric knowledge is knowledge that is accessible but not easily obtained or understood, and therefore takes an active will to ascertain and understand. Occulted knowledge in the not so distant past has become more esoteric and therefore can be known and understood. So what is the difference between exoteric and esoteric? The exoteric is intended for or likely to be understood by the general public, current or popular among the general public, relating to the outside world. External, from Greek exoterikos, outer, outside. And esoteric is intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with specialized knowledge or interest, from the Greek esoterikos, within, into. And you see, the truth is actually at the center and independent of both, but we get closer to it by seeking out the esoteric knowledge. And that's important to understand. If we're not aware of mind control and what it is and how it works, we need to look into this subject, because it is happening in our modern world, and it's done by the control of information. And I'm not going to get into this, but just going to give you some of the examples that Mark Passio gives on methods of manipulation concerning mind control. Obfuscation, worldview poisoning, primal fears, preying on primal fears, divide and conquer, indoctrination, controlled opposition, the financial system, control of mass media, food and medicine, the illusion of time, the DHR factor, which is denial, hassle, ridicule, and how that affects our response to what's happening in our world. Religion, subversive symbolism, and chaos sorcery, which is a form of mass trauma-based mind control. And I would just take this minute to distinguish that there is a discernment to make between mass mind control and trauma-based mind control. So, largely our general population is sleeping, and we're all waking up. And I'm not saying that we're all waking up, but I'm just saying that a large portion of the population here is largely asleep to actually how the world really works and why they're getting the information that they are getting and the context that they're getting, and how it's actually affecting and playing out in real time in our modern world. So human nature, what is human nature? Nature versus nurture. Are we born inherently good, or are we born inherently evil? We are born neither inherently good or bad, but rather programmable, like a computer. We put garbage in, we get garbage out, like a computer. So what are the truth discovery methods? These are very important, and they're not taught in school. And if we don't know about these, we need to seek them out. The one thing I want to say about the trivium method, which is input, processing, output, and that associated with right brain receives information, processes through the left, and then supposedly should be in balance, outputted with balance. But that would be the ideal situation. To understand the trivium, you need to understand the logical fallacies, and it's quite a long list, but to seek out the logical fallacies and understand and work with that. The trivium is also associated with grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Input, processing, output, information. And I'm just showing you, these are prereqs to understand what we're going to talk about today. This is where I was talking about, information in through the right brain, processed through the left, and then in balance is where we want to be when we get to the rhetoric stage. Many people are stuck in the grammar stage, and that has to do directly with the appeal to authority. Quadrivium, I'm not going to break this down, but these are very important to understand. The quadrivium is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And again, this is associated with the arts and sciences general curriculum, but understanding how that translates in the alchemical method. And I'm not even going to break this slide down. I just want you to know that these are the truth discovery methods that we need to reclaim and apply to understand what we're talking about today. And apophysis, to me, this is the most critical. Affirmation through negation. For instance, what is a right? It's, our list of rights are infinite, and we could never list all of our rights. But through affirmation, through negation, we can discover what a right is by understanding what a right is not. And natural law transgressions that have come up more than once today, rape, theft, murder, coercion, those kinds of things, those are not rights. So to understand what a right is, we can discover this through apophysis by what a right is not. And you actually find it's a very short list and can be basically boiled down to one, which is theft. Apophysis from the Greek I can't pronounce that. But to say no, a method of logical reason employed when given a limited set of possibilities in order to arrive at knowledge by way of the exclusion of known negatives, describing what something is by explaining what it is not. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. A.C. Doyle. And you don't hear this talked about, the Hegelian dialectic as a truth discovery method, but to me it's one of the most important. And that is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And many of us are familiar with the obfuscated, inverted form of this as a form of controlled opposition, but I wanted to talk about this for a second. By harmonizing two dialectics into one harmonious compound. And we do this by seeking the source that satisfies both sides of an argument. And this, to me, is one of the most critical truth discovery methods. And I learned that by reading a book by Jesse L. Weston, Ritual to Romance, and it was my contention that that was the proper use of the Hegelian dialectic. The improper use of the Hegelian dialectic is a framework for guiding thoughts and actions into a conflict that lead to synthetic solutions, which can only be introduced by those being manipulated to take a side that will advance a predetermined agenda, controlled opposition, Democrat, Republican, as an example. We must be careful when considering the ramifications of this type of dialectic, because the push from one side is always designed to provoke a predetermined response from the other, or create the outcry. And remember, more control equals less freedom. The shows I have done with Bill Church and Metatron, because I'm going through so much information, there is groundwork that I have laid there for what I plan to come back and trying to do now. So if you want to work with those shows, I have laid some groundwork there. In order to say no, we have to have the KNOW, the why. So without that, we really are powerless, and we need to understand that. So what is the problem? Vernon Howard said, human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. The problem, ignorance, is the ultimate barrier, and it's fear-induced. Ignorance is, better pronounced ignorance, because it's a sheer act of will. Ignoring the negative ensures that you get more of it. So when we're dealing with, what is manifesting in our physical reality, we have to understand that external coercive control is a manifestation of unsorted shadow content of the subconscious in the aggregate of our species, as a result of trying to abdicate personal responsibility of understanding principles. First things, we must know the capital S self by knowing the lowercase self and its inherent connection with nature or the environment in which the self operates. The further we stray from our bond with nature, the further we fall from perfection as a species. Ben Stewart. I don't know if anybody's read 1984, but if you haven't, I suggest that you do. George Orwell is certainly one of the most profound authors of our time, and it was a real eye-opener for me. It's all about breaking the will. And in the post-apocalyptic world, which means the truth has been revealed, we have this opportunity now to fix this, where as less than 100 years ago, we otherwise did not have access to the information that we need to get this done. We have it now. We don't want to squander it. That's my point. So in the post-apocalyptic world in which we live, we either go all the way into the fiction, 1984, or we go all the way into reality and restore our bond with nature. And this doesn't mean we have to go back to living in huts or anything. It just, we have to understand what technology and science is actually benefiting the species. George Batile says the truth is paradoxical to the extent of being exactly contrary to the usual perception. And I found that to be very true, and it's very frightening. So we really need to take another look and look a little deeper. J. Edgar Hoover said the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to the realization of the evil which has been introduced in our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. So how do we value the individual? You know, most people associate the value of the individual with a number, you know, and typically the number of, zeros in your bank account. And the infinite value of the individual is based on our capacity for understanding principles. So each individual has infinite value based on their capacity for understanding principles. First things. So in a state of dominion, only in a state of dominion, which is balance, can we take an action based in love. And love is a word that's irreparably destroyed. Our English language is irreparably destroyed, and that's what 1984 deals a lot with. But true love, the highest form of love, is agape. And the Greeks, you know, they had three terms that they used. They used eros, which is romantic love, and then philos, which is brotherly platonic love, and then agape being the highest expression, which is expanding consciousness or expanding awareness. So only with agape can we truly achieve the state of dominion and take an action based in love. An action based in fear of punishment, any action based in fear results in chaos. So we need to really fully understand, and these are, again, just some prereqs I'm trying to explain. What is natural law? Based on principles and truth inherent to creation, harmonized with, due to knowledge and understanding, universal existence applies anywhere in the universe regardless of location. Eternal and immutable existence applies for as long as the universe exists and cannot be changed. What is man's law? Based on dogmatic belief, constructs of the mind, complied with due to fear of punishment. Defers location based upon the whim of legislators, moral relativism. Changes with time based upon the whim of legislators, moral relativism. These are the expressions of natural law. The important thing to understand about this is that once an action occurs, if it's an action based in love, it cannot break its column, and the expressions, you know, they follow suit straight down. So in order to have external anarchy, no masters, we need to have internal monarchy. And an action based in fear results in chaos. So if we have internal anarchy, the expected expression in the manifested reality can only be chaos. Very important to understand. And like I say, you know, we could extrapolate on these slides for several hours. And there's more knowledge that we need to fully understand the ramifications of the impact of this information, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Natural law, what is natural? The definition here given: inherent, having a basis in nature, reality, truth, not made or caused by humankind. Law, an existing condition which is binding and immutable, cannot be changed. Natural law is ultimately expressed through 7 basic principles. First things, those who know and adhere to these principles possess the key through which wisdom of the universe is unveiled. It's also known as the law of cause and effect, law of attraction, law of karma, and moral law, and the golden rule. Law of cause and effect: energy invariably follows, or effect invariably follows cause. For every action there exists an equal and opposite reaction. Law of attraction: the energy you emit is the energy you attract. Energy flows where attention goes. As you think, so shall so you shall be. And karmatic law, you reap what you sow, and the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, and apophatically, do not do unto others as you would not want others not to do unto you, if I said that right. What are the 7 natural laws? Mentalism, all is mind. In order for anything to exist, it must first come from mind. That's the main thing to understand. Correspondence, as above, so below. Vibration, all things are in motion. All things are vibrating is basically the basic tenets of that. Polarity, everything has two poles, and they're just different degrees of the same thing, and we need to understand each opposite aspect. Principle of rhythm, ebb and flow, rise and fall. Consciousness rises and falls like the tides. And cause and effect, and the principle of gender, everything has a masculine and feminine aspect, and these are very important to understand. Natural law transgressions, murder, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, and there's a few more, but we can boil it all down to theft. So natural law based in principles, capital L law, harmonized with, due to knowledge and understanding, immutable, exists for as long as the universe exists. Man's lowercase law based on dogma, applied with due to fear of punishment, changes on the whim of legislators, moral relativism. In order to truly understand what a right is, we do need a deep knowledge of what ownership is and what property is. So what is right, correct, based in truth? Moral, based in natural law, actions based in it, do not result in harm to other sovereign beings. What is wrong, incorrect, not based in truth, immoral, not based in natural law, actions based in it, result in harm to other sovereign beings. So we have the responsibility whenever we hand over our natural law right to use force to another individual, group, or entity, we have abdicated our own personal responsibility, which is the foundational basis for the discovery and understanding of natural law. Responsibility is the ability to respond. So what is gnosis versus dogmatic belief? Gnosis is based in experience. We know from having gone through enough experiences in retrospect this thing to be true, versus belief, which is based on dogma. The only definition I found or brought was knowledge of the spiritual mysteries, and I wanted to really clear that up. Gnosis is knowledge based from experience. You know a thing because you have experienced and witnessed it in your own retrospect or experiences in life and know it to be true. It's about how we test our intuition. And there's a lot more we need to understand gnosis, because only through the gnosis can we really get into the deeper knowledge and the mysteries will unravel. So what is, what belief is based on dogma versus gnosis based on experience, and belief is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. If somebody has a belief and they're willing to act on it, we can be affected by that. So whether we believe in what they believe in or not, we can still be affected by that. So our belief is really irrelevant. So we need to be aware. What are the mystery traditions? There are modern mystery traditions that have come from the more ancient traditions, specifically Thelema, Theosophy, and the Golden Dawn magical movement. And the reason I think that they are effective in certain ways, but I think that they have the most appeal to us in the modern world because they deal in terms of language, our language, because we are basically limited because we think in terms of words, and that is actually a limitation, but that's part of the appeal of those traditions. But the true mystery traditions are Kabbalah, Tarot, and Freemasonry, and these are the most ancient of the mystery traditions, and until modern times they were pretty much occulted. And it's very important to understand that it wasn't that far back in the not so distant past that this knowledge was basically completely cut off from the outside world. It was completely esoteric and occulted. But these are the primary mystery traditions that we can learn, and they're just models, to understand and to understand the self and help understand the nature of the self, and Freemasonry, in my view, being by far the most ancient. And I just brought this slide to show how the Kabbalah corresponds with the chakra systems in the geocentric model, which pushes the earth at the heart chakra. And also want you to understand that take a look. I'm getting way too far ahead. So I better just stick with the program here. What we know in the modern world as Freemasonry is the most ancient of all traditions, mysteries or otherwise, and only when we understand it in its pure essence can we see how it becomes embellished. Freemasonry in its purest forms is the essence of the stellar mythos created by the stellar people who built the pyramids 150,000 years ago. You're not going to hear that number anywhere else. And I'm just showing you see the directions on this board with the east, north, south, east, and west, because there's so much archetypal symbolism in this board. This board is a book. And if you have the knowledge, it's mind-blowing how much knowledge is in that one image. And I'm not going to break it down now, but you could study this book for the rest of your life and still make new discoveries. And what the emphasis I'm putting on is the power of these archetypes and this symbolism. How much knowledge is stored in that one image is staggering. And again, you see there's more knowledge here when you turn it on its side. Here on its side, the upper pillar represents the Tropic of Cancer, and the lowest pillar represents Tropic of Capricorn, and that deals with the path of the sun, this sine wave here, which gives us our seasons. So that's dealing with the path of the sun. And that's very important to understand. There's even more knowledge, and then going, towards the west versus going towards the east. This is going away from the light, going towards the light. And there's just so much. That is literally a book in itself. And that's the first degree board of Freemasonry. And this is my favorite board. This represents the second degree of Freemasonry, and it represents the middle chamber, the heart chakra. And I will say, most Freemasons or otherwise that have gone past this board do not deserve to be past this board. And that's, I'm making that statement. And that it's my favorite board, and it has the spiral staircase. And what that's showing you is you can't see what's in that middle chamber when you're on the floor of base consciousness, and only when you get into the middle chamber will you be able to access those doors that are in there. And in each one of those doors, there's a polarity of positive and negative energy. And if you can't transmute that into something positive, it can be very terrifying. So this is why if people do access the middle chamber, most run out screaming and never go back in. And you can't access higher knowledge and divine knowledge until you come into the middle chamber. So in my view, most people that have passed the second degree, and I'm not a Mason, by the way, the way I understand these traditions, and Lodge Masonry is largely corrupted in the modern world, and I don't have anything to do with it. I'm just saying these are models and archetypes that we can use to understand the self. So just wanted to make those points. And the point I wanted to make about this third degree board is that, when you look at it in comparison to the first and second degree board, you see a reduction in the symbolism, okay? Because there's less symbolism there, but there's because it's a higher degree board, allegedly there's more knowledge there. So it's showing you that the more advanced board contains more knowledge and less symbolism, which means the more advanced we get in the language of archetypes and symbolism, the more we realize that more knowledge can be stored in less symbol. And that's very important to understand, because that's what we're going to be talking about here if we can get through this. So, here's the atypical, or the typical, symbol that we know, Freemasonry. We see these outside townships on signs and people's, bumper stickers or their license plates. But this is the triangle on top of the square, and that's about the spiritual realm over the physical realm. The G represents the care, gnosis, the generative specifically is the most important thing to associate that with. The triangle always tops the square, placing the spirit above the physical only when we have developed true care and are able to fulfill our role in nature as steward of the earth. Building on solid foundations is what gives rise to this tradition in its purest forms. The concept translates to both physical and spiritual foundations. I'm just going to go ahead and say here that the pyramid builders did not use arches. And this arch deals with the path of the sun and the day sky. And its highest aspect would be represented by high noon. Because it's all about the most high. The highest place of enlightenment that we can rise to. And this is the holy mountain. Okay, so this arch is solar mythos. And that comes after stellar mythos. And the stellar mythos are the pyramid builders. They do not use arches, they use lintels. And that's very important to understand. And there are no hieroglyphs on the pyramids. And if there are, they came long after the pyramids were built. So the pyramid builders were stellar people and did not use arch formations. Instead, they use a lintel. This knowledge reveals that the holy mountain, the arch, of royal arch masonry concerns the path of the sun, the day sky, and in the summer cycle, spring equinox to summer solstice. And spring and summer cycle, and is consistent with solar doctrine and solar mythos. And I know these words may be unfamiliar to many of us, but I'm going to try to help explain that later on. I'm just giving you an introduction to it now. Over here you see the two pillars. Okay, these are the tat pillars. And it deals with the polarities, all things dual, brought into balance. Many people associate this with the Stargate, but what the real point of me having that slide is to make this point that they do not use archways, the pyramid builders. And here again, the Kabbalah and Tarot, to study one without the other, you would only have half of a picture. So just showing you how they are directly related. And it's just models that became more advanced, and it's indicative of an advancement in the sciences as well. And we see the Hebrew characters here having a direct association with these traditions. So you're seeing an advancement in the language associated with these traditions. This is the menorah. I'm not really going to break it down, but it really is the Kabbalah when we understand these points here. This is directly related to the Kabbalah. And you might see a menorah with 8 or 9, and that's, the 8 you can work with, but the 9, that would be a complete obfuscation, trying to hide the purity of that tradition. I'm not going to break that slide down, but basically it's just showing you that, the tarot is the wheel of Taruth, and you see these words here, basically if you put them all together, Rhoda, Tarot, Erot, Orate, Torah, Ator, it speaks that the wheel of Tarot cultivates. It speaks the law of Hathor. The wheel of Tarot brings order by telling us the law of love. And again, I want to show you how the tarot works directly with the Kabbalah. So to study one without the other, it wouldn't really make sense. And modern playing cards come from the tarot deck of cards, with the exception that the entire major arcana, which deals with the macrocosmic aspects, has been removed. So you have a deck of playing cards. And playing cards are still used for divination, but tarot in its a whole deck used for divination, a very low consciousness application of that what that is about. So you have the right hand path and the left hand path. These correspond to the two pillars. Left hand path, right hand path. And they correspond to the Freemasonic board, So in an imbalance, this is the path of severity, this is the path of mercy. Masculine, feminine. And I want to show you, like Icarus, when Icarus flies too close to the sun, his wings melt because the balance is in the middle. And when we go into scientism and develop technologies that we have no business, we haven't even learned how to steward our own planet, we're getting too close to that solar masculine. And my contention is that this is where that leads. And there are many references in the film Terminator to 1984. For one thing, the film is released in 1984, and the name O'Brien appears on a tombstone in part 3, and there's more. But this is where we are. And I don't want to scare the hell out of anybody, but better keep that in mind. And when I'm going to be talking about the solar cult overlap, I just thought I'd mention that, the initials JC, John Connor, that's connected to solar cult, savior for mankind. And that AI, artificial intelligence, is not a human invention, but rather a human discovery. It exists. We didn't invent it. We discovered it. Nikola Tesla says that science is but a perversion of itself unless it has as its ultimate goal the betterment of humanity. And I mean, this is very, very important to understand. So, the religion of one of the two, things that hold us back from true consciousness and self-awareness, the religion of money and the religion of authority. And these are the two big ones, So, money controls the flow of energy. That's all it does. It's fiat. It does have any intrinsic value except the value that our belief in it imbues in it. It has no value. It's paper. Even gold doesn't really have any intrinsic value. It's durable, and it has some use limited in technologies because of its durability, but it really doesn't you can't eat it. It's just, we have to understand, these things. And I mean, I wish I could break these slides down for you because I could talk about them for a while, but just understand these are the two of the big barriers, the religion of money and the religion of authority. The belief in the legitimacy of authority is the belief in the legitimacy of slavery. The best way to learn the secrets of nature is not by inventing new instruments, but improving the investigator himself. Without the totality of the knowledge, we can be easily kept on a cul-de-sac, and therefore we must gain gnosis, knowledge of self, in order to understand the limitations of all the teachers in the world and transcend the appeal to authority. There really are no teachers. They're only unwilling students. Gerald Massey said they must find it difficult, those who have taken the authority as the truth rather than the truth as the authority. And the plane of causality is the mental world. It's where the why exists. All power to effect change lies here. Thus, this is where the human consciousness must go. The plane of effects is the physical world where no change can be affected. If we just, go over there and deal with that problem and fix that, or go over here and deal with that problem and fix that, it's just a matter of time before it remanifests. You're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. No power to affect change lies here. But this is where human consciousness is trapped. And this is critical But I don't have time to break this slide down for you. This is just the allegory in the movie The Matrix when they get, it's part 2, when they get to the Merovingian. And he tells them they have no power because you do not have the why. You didn't come here. And Neo can't understand, so he seeks out the Oracle, and she tells him you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made the choice. You're here to try to understand why you made it. And I'm not going to even break this down, but I mean, it's a really powerful algorithm if we can understand this. We have no power without the why. In order to say no, N-O, we must have the K-N-O-W, the why. And in relation to causality, the law of freedom. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. So there's the first half. I'll take a break. Thank you.
Next part's going to be a lot more interesting, so I hope you come back. It'll be a lot more interesting. Okay, I'm back.
Origins of the human species. This is actually the primary focus of my talk. Max Heindel says it should not be too difficult for any person of average intelligence to acquire a knowledge of at least the outline of the scheme of evolution. That such a knowledge is of the utmost importance will, we think, be conceded by every intelligent individual. We live in this world, governed by the laws of nature. Under these laws, we must live and work, and we are powerless to change them. If we know them and intelligently cooperate with them, these nature forces become most valuable servants. If, on the other hand, we do not understand them, and in our ignorance work contrary to them, they become dangerous enemies capable of terrible destruction. Therefore, the more we know the working methods of nature, which latter is but the visible symbol of the invisible God, the better able we shall be to take advantage of the opportunities it offers for growth and power, for emancipation from bondage, and for elevation to mastery. I hope I read that right, but I think that's a great quote. It does play into what I'm talking about today. So who was Gerald Massey? Gerald Massey says they must find it difficult, those who have taken authority as the truth rather than the truth as authority. Gerald Massey is a renowned Egyptologist from the late 19th century whose seminal work, Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World, based on Norman J. Lockyer's work, The Dawn of Astronomy, revolutionized our knowledge of ancient Egypt. What we know about Egypt, we've only known for the last 100 years, and Babylon, quite frankly. Prior to that, we were pretty much dependent on the Vedic texts of the Eastern traditions. Massey, although himself not initiated in the mystery traditions, had two distinguished apprentices, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, American, and Albert Churchward, British. Churchward, as a 32nd degree initiate in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, brings new light to Massey's foundational research, which reveals that all indigenous cultures from around the globe had exodus out of the Nile Valley in Africa at different stages of our evolution in remote antiquity. So what is the origin schism? Associated with left brain, Darwinianism; with the right brain, creationism. Again, with Darwinianism, matter is in left brain, Darwinianism, matter is supreme, spirit is non-existent or insignificant, there is no underlying intelligence or consciousness in nature, nature is dead and mechanized clockwork with no purpose, and that genes control beings like computer code controls a program. Creationism, associated with right brain, Spirit is supreme, matter is inferior, and it should be looked down upon. The Creator is separate from the creation. Nature is something that is separate from us, and we should not see ourselves as part of it. God controls everything, every event within creation, so no such change can be created unless God wills it to be so. What do these two entrenched paradigms share in common? They both omit free will. Okay? And human rationalism and human reasoning, rather than dependence on the wisdom of the gods, became the central idea of the Greeks and lead to their great many achievements as a evolving culture. Well, you know what? I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but the Aristotelian logic replaced the sayings of the wise in their philosophies, but left men to face the vastness of the unexplained cosmos using their own observations. And the ethical monotheism of the Hebrews, with emphasis on dignity, lead to many achievements of the Hebrews. The contrary ideal of the Greeks and Hebrews are both principal sources of Western civilization, which ironically is riddled with pestilence and war. So both of these worldview, the left brain randomness worldview and the right brain deterministic worldview, both omit free will. And free will is the random component. And natural law is the deterministic component. And I didn't really explain this as well as I need to, but and I'm probably putting too much information with it, but just understand the Greeks' rationalism and the ethical monotheism of the Hebrews both play a huge role in what we have in our world today. And that both of these worldviews associated with these two different types of brain imbalance both omit free will, which is the random component. And I need to extrapolate more on this, but what do I got here? Darwin's ideas concerning evolution are only concerning autonomy, negating the component of free will as well as the spiritual aspects of the self. Creationism holds that the universe is created by God, all things preordained, therefore free will had no place in it. Both of these ideologies negate free will, which is the random component, while determinism is the autonomous component. Both are necessary for human evolution to occur. That slide was out of place, I see. Okay, so the deterministic evolution is autonomous, which means basically at the point where, prior to where we become self-aware, everything that happens up to that point is autonomous. But the point where we become self-aware, our free will intercedes with autonomous evolution. And that is the random component. And, evolution is constituted, not so much by cranial size, but it's the thickness and the depth of the gray matter, the telencephalon, higher upper part of the brain above the reptile and the mammal brain, which basically constitute two forms of brain or animal consciousness. And the furrows and the sulci in the brain are the depth of the sulci, which are the furrows in the brain, constitute the actual evolution that's taking place. And boy, how do I explain that? I couldn't write all this out because if I wrote it yesterday, it would sound different today. I'm trying to explain that if we're looking for evidence of our evolution in the osteoanatomy, That would only be found in the strata, which is the layers of the crust, the upper and lower layers of the Earth's crust. We would only be able to evidence that in the Nile Valley, because each exodus that takes place out of the Nile Valley causes a stagnation in the evolution. So if we look in the Nile Valley, in the strata, we will find increasing cranial sizes, and only there. But again, like I say, what really constitutes the osteoanatomy evidence is the depth of the sulci and the furrows in the brain, because a lot of our brain is not activated. So what we're trying to do is learn to see 360 degrees in darkness, and that's the idea of the halo, to be able to see 360 degrees in the darkness. That's one reason the owl was divinized, because it could turn its head 360 degrees, and it had a tremendous night vision superior to other creatures. But this is very important to understand, and very few do, and very few have looked at it. But as we know, I'm talking about a long period of time ago, and most of the osteoanatomy, the biological evidence, is decomposed. But it is there, but it's not really accessible to us in the state of the world that we're in right now. But it is there, and it's only there in the Nile Valley. So that's the main point I wanted to make about this. And so again, the well-trodden pathways are the furs that we have. I smoke cigarettes, okay, by the way, and that's a well-trodden pathway in my brain furrows. Okay, so in order to form other furrows and pathways in the brain, I have to change my quality of attention to get those to activate. And I have to look in the other areas of the brain and form pathways there to activate them. It's just like building muscles, If somebody throws you a medicine ball and you haven't done any crunches, it's going to knock the wind out of you. So a muscle unused atrophies. So we have to understand this to develop to understand how we're developing the brain. And in the mystery traditions, that's what they're designed to do, is to activate these unseen aspects of the psyche, which stimulate activity in those unused parts of the brain. And I mean, there's so much more I need to say about this, but I got too much. I've got too ambitious a presentation, but I hope I've made myself somewhat comprehensive with this material, because it's very important to understand. And so all roads will lead us back to Africa. And the main thing I wanted to understand, I'm going to just say with confidence, is that this is the cradle of civilization. The Great Lakes of Central Africa. And that the Nile River is a river that flows north and empties into the Mediterranean. So what we know as modern Egypt here is Lower Egypt. So in the south, and when I say Egypt, I mean the Nile Valley, which is 4,000 miles long. So the southern part of this Nile River is Upper Egypt. So this is Lower Egypt, and this is Upper Egypt. Ecclesiastic 1.4-11. There is nothing new under the sun. And as I said, the Nile River flows north 4,000 miles. It's 4,000 miles long. So we need to make the inward journey, not a pilgrimage across the globe to a far away land. Because in order to have the gnosis, we have to know the self. And this has to do with the understanding, the things that we need to understand what I'm talking about here. We need to go back the way go back the way you came. What we need was lost along the pathway, and we need to go back and recover what had been lost there. The idea that modern problems must be or can be solved with modern ideas is a fallacy and, quite frankly, hubris. There is no new thought, only machinations that we will do better in a single lifetime than the elders who developed their methods organically over a span of 300,000 years and created a civilization that lasted as long. Succeeded by nothing other than coup d'etat upon another. And each one very short-lived. And that's social Darwinism. So the survival of the fittest equates to survival of the most ruthless. And that is really, I really hope I'm making myself clear on that. The Nile River flows north and is 4,000 miles long. Upper South and Lower North Egypt. As I talked about, the southern part is Upper Egypt and the northern part is Lower Egypt. And during the evolution of their mythos and their sciences, which were held together as a sacred science and keeping track of their prehistoric past, all in one system of their ideologies of how to do that, which was very organic for them, the way they did this. But during the evolution, they sent exoduses out, which take place west, east, and north. And each exodus that takes place out of the Nile Valley causes a stagnation in our evolution. So whatever they take with them, when they leave, it stagnates in the mythos and therefore stagnates the evolution. And we'll find these cultures, indigenous cultures all over the world, and they'll still have their traditions. They'll still have some of the tenets of their traditions intact, but so much time has passed, and because of the stagnation, they don't really even know what it means themselves anymore. But they're still endeavoring to keep it intact. And to understand culture is a difficult thing. I'm going to try to explain it, but the word culture comes from the word agriculture, which was the center and the driver for our sciences. And to them, all new discoveries were sacred. So they kept all things sacred, and they kept it all in one place. So they kept what they understood about their sciences intact with the way they understood the mythos. And the mythos is about how they translate what they're witnessing in the physical realm to the psychic realm. So agriculture it means to grow something. And the seed, although it is the smallest thing, to them is considered their most sacred thing. So that companionship between man and the seed is what they're really largely concerned with. Boy, I hope I can explain this correctly. But, and that's what's taking place. So each exodus that takes place out of this Nile Valley causes that stagnation. And only here does it continue to evolve. And then at some point it gets corrupted and then ultimately lost. Then you have the science separated from the mythos, and then what's left of the fragments of the mythos leads to exoteric religion. And then, because as we break things down into smaller and smaller parts, the science becomes more tangible, but the mythos becomes less and less understood. So they use the seed truth method, and the seed truth method was about, anybody that wanted to receive higher knowledge that could demonstrate they were ready to receive the high knowledge was not excluded from access to that. And because they used the seed truth method and did stage the exoduses out during the evolution of the mythos, even though it was scattered all over the globe, with our modern technology and sharing of information, it is only now possible to aggregate that information and form and put that bigger picture back together. And it is possible, but very, very few have done the necessary scientific research to understand how this works. And I'm going to try to further explain that. A tiny seed of truth is found in every human being. If we protect and nourish that tiny seed, it will grow into the mighty tree of truth. The idea of the seed truth method was conceived by the ancient elders as a result of agriculture being the drive for all the advancements in thought and science. Anyone who wished to attain higher knowledge would have the ability to access to it, and the elders used the seed truth method of planted truths that were intended to grow naturally. Time is the distance between the seed and the fruit. Genesis is time. We situate the cosmic and terrestrial cycles in its phases. That's R.A. Schwaller de Lubbock's. And he was a renowned Egyptologist of the 20th century. Now here on the left, we have the Akkadian or Sumerian relief, and we see he's holding the pine cone. And to me, this is directly related to the seed truth method. And then here's the Assyrian, what the Greeks called the bird beast. But it's basically the same thing. And both of these, my contention is that these are both Egyptian. Both of these originate in Egypt. And one of the most significant things that we're witnessing here is left foot forward. Because left foot forward is their way of symbolizing human evolution. And this left foot forward is about, because the right brain controls the left side of the body. Beyond autonomous evolution, it's only a deeper connection with the source, the cause, that can further our ascension. So the term evolution is a dangerous term. So I want to, not replace it with the word ascension, but associate it with the word ascension. And left foot forward is very, very significant to understand. Our history as a species goes deep into and beyond the Pleistocene period, which is about 10,000 years ago to 1.6 million years ago. Most historians and scholars only focus on the last 4,000 to 6,000 years and consider anything beyond that to be uncivilized, while claiming that civilization begins in the northern Fertile Crescent in Sumer. In order to ascribe to this notion, one would have to completely ignore what we find in Egypt, and specifically the pyramids of Giza. These were built 150,000 years ago by stellar people and contain no hieroglyphs and no archways. The knowledge preserved in these structures is the sum total of all knowledge developed by the stellar people of the Nile Valley. The knowledge is stored in these structures in many different ways, but specifically, it is in the form of the structures themselves. And in order to be understood, we must bring a great deal of knowledge to the information, or it does not reveal anything new to us. This method is part of the genius of the ancients, who devised these methods over long periods of time in a lasting civilization that evolved itself and existed at least 300,000 years until the mythos was corrupted. Terms such as Neanderthal, caveman, Neolithic, Paleolithic do not serve us. Our research into lost histories. The only true divisions are pre-totemic, totemic, non-hero cult, and hero cult. And the three divisions the three evolutionary stages of the hero cult are stellar, lunar, and solar. So the non-hero cult, they believed in the one great spirit, but they did not propitiate it, and they did not have totemic rites. So the totemic people, they became the hero cult, and I'm going to explain what that is. And that evolves through three stages, stellar, lunar, and solar. Then the pyramids were built by the stellar people. The stellar mythos lasted at least 300,000 years. And began at least 300,000 years ago, but I'm going to say it lasted, at least 150,000 years, from 300,000 years ago to 150,000 years when the pyramids were built. The lunar mythos came and replaced that. After that, 150,000 years ago, and lasted for about 50,000 years. And then the solar mythos begins about 100,000 years ago into the present world. And at each transfer of the mythos, what's actually taking place is an advancement in the sciences, because they're trying to put a finer point on time. So I hope I'm going to explain this. If not, I'm going to jump back to the slide. But let's see what I got. The stellar mythos, 300,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago, is at the end of that is when the pyramids were built. And they were built to store the sum total of the knowledge that they had. And that knowledge was all stored in the number 7. And then when it transfers into lunar mythos, what they're doing is they're trying to put a finer point on time, because they did not divinize annual cycles. They divinized, starting in the south, the southern circumpolar constellations. And then they brought that into the north, and as they were coming into the north, then they venerated both pole stars, the southern pole stars and the northern pole stars. And then ultimately it ends up primacy in the north. And when it goes to primacy in the north, that means they're only venerating the northern circumpolar constellations. And the reason for that is because the association that the north is above the south, which basically means that it's easy to remember that it's the Most High. And when they transfer into the lunar mythos, you have the first holdouts of the priest classes that did not want to transfer the mythos into annual cycles. So at the end of the solar mythos, following the building of the pyramids, is where you have the first holdouts of the priest class. And what they had of their mythos, they tried to keep intact, but so much time passed, and the mythos does not evolve anymore in their mythos. In order to follow the evolution of it, you have to follow it up through the lunar and then into the solar to follow the evolution. And things were breaking down into smaller and smaller parts. So at the time that they went into the lunar mythos, they venerated. They tried to transfer what they had in their stellar mythos into the lunar mythos, which concerns the cycle of the moon. And, it's all about agriculture. So they're concerned about the waxing and waning angles of the seasons in the moon and the sun. And it's about when to plant, when to harvest. Okay. And I wish I'd have wrote all this out, but it wouldn't have done any good. And then at the beginning of the solar mythos into the present world, about 100,000 years ago begins the solar mythos. And in the first 30,000 years of that, the spiritual realm was always associated with the night sky. But about 30,000 years into the solar mythos, for the first time, they changed it to the day sky. And at that time, my contention is that's when the major warring began in the priest class, and then the evolution of the mythos began to degrade. You had different priests lighting out of there into the north, taking what they had of the mythos and trying to use it to control the populations. But at the beginning of the solar mythos is when the Sphinx was built 100,000 years ago. And it's important that to understand that for the first 30,000 years of the solar mythos, and prior to that in the lunar and stellar, they never anthropomorphized their deities. And the reason is because they understood the dangers of personifying deities, which what we're thinking of deities or gods, to them were naters, and that simply means elemental powers. I'm kind of tired. So 120,000 years ago, 30,000 years after the pyramids were built, marking the end of the stellar mythos, is basically, I'm saying that Freemasonry in its purest forms is synonymous with what the ancient elders were doing in the stellar mythos. And then after that, it begins to become more scientific and more corrupted. And I don't know how well I'm going to do this because I just don't have it written down. But let me just put it this way. So first, the chronology of this. 120,000 years ago, you had, during the lunar mythos, you have the cult of Atum, and it lasts for about 20,000 years during the end of the lunar mythos, and that puts us at about 100,000 years ago. That's when the Sphinx was built, and what the Sphinx was built for is because it's venerating because you're going in the solar mythos, so it's divinizing the solar path in the night sky. Because they always associated the spiritual realm with only the night sky, and that makes sense, because it's the vastness of space, and the illuminated stars in the night were associated with aspects of the illuminated, and never in the day sky. It's important to understand. So the Sphinx was built 100,000 years ago, facing west. It's facing east, because it's venerating the solar path in the night sky, west to east. And it wasn't until 30,000 years into the solar mythos that it was venerated in the day sky. And but boy, that's hard. It's hard for me to even get my head around it. I'm just a little bit too far out there. But it's very important to understand why the Sphinx was built, and when it was first built, it was not anthropomorphized, so that means no human features. What it was a jackal. Okay? The African gray wolf. And that has to do with, because the African gray wolf is the first the first animal that befriended man. And that companionship between the dog and the man related in their minds to their companionship with the seed, because it's all about agriculture. It's all about putting a finer point on the time, but it's all about, knowing when to plant and when to harvest. That's where it all starts. But that companionship that man gained with the first animal that befriended him, which was the jackal or the African gray wolf, the dog, they associated with their companionship with the seed. And that's very important to understand. And I don't even know if I can fully explain it right now, but that's what I came here to tell you. So the cult of Amen-Ra, starting 120,000 years ago, lasts for about 20,000 years, and that marks the end of the lunar. And then now you're at the 100,000 year point, and then they begin to venerate the solar path in the night sky for the first 30,000 years. And that's when the Sphinx was built, 100,000 years ago, and that's why it was built, because it's venerating the solar path in the night sky, west to east. You're not going to hear this anywhere else, and I'm telling you, I have gnosis of this. This is not conjecture. But you can't understand it until you really understand, what the mysteries are, and understand how the mythos itself is evolving. And when we understand that, we will understand why so few do. So following the cult of Atum, which lasts about 20,000 years, you have the cult of the Sphinx. And that's about 100,000 years ago, and it lasts for 10,000 years at the beginning of the solar mythos. So to just clear this up once and for all, the stellar people did not venerate the sun or the moon, but they understood their annual cycles and their importance. They venerated southern circumpolar constellations that, about the pole stars, starting in the south and then coming into the north. And as they come into the north, first they identify the southern circumpolar constellations, and they associated the jackal with the spiritual realm. And the jackal was the first zoo type venerated in association with the spiritual realm. And it was only as they came into the north that became the falcon. the golden hawk, and that was Horus, and that's we're going to try to talk about that later. So it's very important to understand this, and I'm just going to try to keep saying it until it clicks, but just please understand that that's what that is. And it's the jackal is associated with the south, which is associated with the night sky, which is associated with the spiritual realm, and the companionship between the jackal and man was associated with their companionship with the seed. So the cult of the Sphinx lasts 10,000 years, and then followed by the cult of Ptah, which lasts about 10,000 years, and then the cult of Amen-Ra, which lasts about 20,000 years. It's only till you get to the cult of Amen-Ra that the solar path is divinized in the day sky. So, and like I say, when it came into the north and went primacy in the north, which means they venerated in the northern circumpolar constellations. So first in the southern circumpolar constellations, they venerated in the southern circumpolar constellations, associated that with the jackal, then came in as they're coming into the north, and they venerated double pole star. And then they went primacy into the north, and then that's when the pyramids were built. But it was still God, how in the hell did I say this? Anyway, it wasn't until the cult of Amen-Ra about 70,000 years ago. Yeah, and that when it came primacy in the north, that's when Horus appears. And Horus was venerated in many different zoo types before he arrives as or associated with the zoo type, the hawk or the golden falcon. But that the golden falcon becomes associated with the trek of the sun in the day sky. And that happens in the cult of Amen-Ra 70,000 years ago. So the flight, that's when the zoo type is probably assigned to the bird, because it's about the flight of the sun in the day sky. And then the idea is, sunrise, that's birth, and we're born in darkness, that's ignorance. And then we're rising to our highest place, the prime of life, so birth, growth, decay, and then back into the underworld cycle, which plays out later on in the eschatology. God, I don't know if I can do this. But anyway, following the cult of Amen-Ra, you have the cult of Osiris, and I think what's significant about that is because the cult of Osiris deals back with the underworld cycle, and it shows that there's a struggle in the priest class to get it back into the night sky, because they understood the dangers of venerating the solar path in the day sky, because there's only a single cosmic body in the day sky, and that is the sun. And then, that actually leads to people literally worshiping the sun, the object, as God. And that's very important to understand. And so most researchers and anthropologists and Egyptologists will tell you that Osiris is the first of the Egyptian god, when in fact he's the last. And then following the cult of Osiris, which lasts 20,000 years, you have the eschatology, and then after which lasts 20,000 years, and then after that, Egypt collapses, and then dynastic Egypt begins, and Christian doctrines arose out of the ashes of the eschatology. So evolution of species corresponds to evolution of the mythos. Evolution of species is evidenced by the increased depth of the gray matter in the brain and the depth of the sulci and furrows of the brain to create a higher type. Exodus out of the Nile occur west, east, and north during the evolution of the mythos. Each exodus out causes stagnation in the mythos in the current state of evolution, and subsequently stagnation of the evolution of the species in settled regions around the globe. Therefore, the biological evidence can only be found in the strata of the Nile Valley. The other evidence that is abundant in our time is the evidence of the implement and the tool making and how that evolves, and included advancements in military formations and weaponry. This evidence cannot be ignored when we consider our evolutionary progress as a species. The idea that the ancients possessed advanced technologies is easily debunked when we consider the evidence in the tool making. They did not have advanced technologies compared to the rest of the world in their time, because they were more advanced in their, what the hell do I got here? They were more advanced in their evolution, but they didn't have anything like the technology that we have in our world today. So, you know, when they're asking you, where's the evidence for evolution? You know, the osteoanatomy evidence can only be found in the Nile Valley. But in the tool making, that's readily present. And we can all see that, you know, that there's an advancement in implements and tool making. So that's what I was trying to say. They did have advanced technologies compared to the rest of the world in their time because they were more advanced in their evolution, but nothing like in the modern world of technology today. The evolution occurs because the sciences are kept intact with the evolution of the mythos, which fully engages both brain hemispheres in balance. Once science becomes the primary pursuit, evolution stagnates, but we can now harness elemental powers. So we can wield elemental powers. We can control the weather, for instance. In other words, play God. The idea that any cultures pre-Aryan are savage and uncivilized is true only by their metric and standard in comparison to Aryan cultures. In other words, we have to ignore Egypt to make that assertion. They did not understand the Egyptian languages, which were sign language and symbol, and they could only endeavor to take what they could and lay claim to it, but never fully understood the mythos and its importance. The non-totemic people of Africa believed in one great spirit, but had no totemic rites and no ceremonial perpetuation of ancestry or otherwise. The totemic hero cult in the Nile Valley did develop ceremonial rites and veneration in this order. First, they venerated and propitiated elemental powers. Then they propitiated ancestry, which you could say is the origins of religion. And they did that by building huts on the west side of the Nile, because, you know, they believe in the eternal spirit, and they associated the passing into the underworld, you know, in our journey of the soul, they associated that with the sun setting in the west. So the setting of the sun in the west is associated in their mind with the spirit in its next part of the journey. So to them, death is not a dissolution, it's just the beginning of the next phase of the journey. So they don't have a term for death, they call it westing. And they first propitiated ancestry by building huts on the west side of the river, tabernacles, if you will. And that's about the triangle, the spiritual realm, on top of the square. So the triangle is the spiritual realm, the square is the physical realm. So the spiritual always goes above the physical realm. And I mean, I know this is hard stuff, I can't even deal with it, but it's true. And I'm also postulating that this is why the pyramids are on the west side of the Nile River. So keep that in mind. Ancestry propitiated by building hut houses on the west side of the river. The idea that the setting sun is going into the world in the west, and the path was the path that the ancestral spirit must follow to complete its journey in the life and death cycle. This concept is further elaborated in the Egyptian eschatology at the end of the evolution of the mythos. So they developed their totemic rites in sign and symbol language. First, they developed totemic rites and stored their knowledge in symbol, and they venerated it and repeated it. The terms like worship are confusing. So, you know, what they're doing is repetition, because that's how they store the knowledge, that's how they pass the knowledge on. Then they divinized the zoo types, which divided the sisterhoods from the brotherhoods and motherhoods from the fatherhoods. Then they divinized the cosmos. And the stellar people worked out their cosmology for 60,000 years before they gave it to anybody else, so keep that in mind. And the precessional cycle of the southern and northern circumpolar constellations have to do with the precessional cycle. and that is a 26,000 or 25,870 year cycle. So I got that number wrong. It's 25,000 roughly 870 year cycle. So when they transferred knowledge into the lunar and solar mythos, what they're trying to do is put a finer point on time. Then they divinized double pole star divinized, then primacy in the northern circumpolar constellations. And that's specifically the Little Bear, which is Ursa Minor. Then they build the pyramids. And what the number 7 is originally about is a sabbatical year. So every 7 years they do not plant or rotate crops. And that's venerated in the 7-day week. Why? So we don't forget. Because in 7 years we might forget. So they venerated that in the 7-day week. So you have 6 days for work and then 1 day for rest. You have 6 years for plant and harvest, and then either rotate crops or don't plant. And that's what that's about. That's what the sabbatical year is about. It's very important to understand. And then all of the knowledge is preserved in that number 7. And we have to understand how the 7 corresponds to the 6, which is transition, and the 8 is the 1. See, we need to understand music to understand how the 8 is the 1. Because in music, you have 7 tones in the scale, and then the scale starts over. So the 8 is the 1, and when you turn the 8 on its side, that's the infinity symbol. It represents balance of the polarities, and where the intersection is, that's where the action occurs. Man, I just can't do this. But it's true. So it's all in that number 7. The 3 in the triangle, points of the triangle, on top of the 4 in the square. The spiritual on top of the square. That's what I'm talking about. And it's all in that number 7, and that's venerated in the constellation Ursa Minor, which they divinized as the Little Bear. That was a zoo type. Jeez, I can't do this. But 120,000 years ago to 30,000 years after the pyramids were built, marking the end of the stellar mythos, Freemasonry in its pure form, blah, blah. We already did that slide. So we have to bring a lot of knowledge to this information to understand it. And most of the information in the modern world is post-cult of Osiris, and what that means within the last 30,000 years. And quite frankly, most of the knowledge we're working with is in the last 5,000 years. And I'm trying to give you, what happened before that. And I mean, it's the largest part of our lost history. So most anthropologists, archaeologists, and geologists assert that Osiris is the first of the Egyptian gods, in fact, when he's the last. So what were the medicine men? Med is middle, to bring to the middle, balance. And this is what the shamans were about, to bring balance. And this is the caduceus symbol. We know it as the wand of Hermes, and it's about the serpents represent raised kundalini energy in balance. And their methods of healing was about the body being able to heal itself by bringing it into balance. And this was adopted by the medical practice when they established as an institution in the 7th century. Okay, so what were the methods of the medicine men? Well, the shamanism would use these entheogens to understand their spiritual nature. And sacrum means holy. And mente is mind. So the sacrament is something that the medicine men would use. And my contention is this, that these particular mushrooms maybe, or whatever they were using, may have, this is just something I'm gonna throw in, been growing out of the cow dung. So the idea of holy cow comes from this. And the idea of going out to pasture is a medicine man that has lost his way. So they send him out to pasture, and he follows the cow around, and these mushrooms spring up, and then he reassembles his balance. It's all part of a sacred science. So to abuse compounds like these for escapism, that's not what they're for. And it's important to understand that any brain trauma can activate glandular activity in the brain. Hippocrates said that let thy food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. And he was a Greek physician in roughly the Hellenistic period or Hellenic period. So what is the pineal gland? This pineal gland releases chemicals at the time of birth and at the time of death. And it is the Stargate, and it would cause you to have an out-of-body experience. It's only going to activate when the brain has been traumatized and thinks it's dying. And, I just don't think I'm going to be able to do this, but this is what that was about, them understanding the spiritual nature of themselves. And going to have to start moving real fast. So anyway, the hero myth is associated with this. And, we have to understand, I'm not advocating for use of entheogenic compounds. I'm telling you what the ancient elders did and how this came to be. How they learned the spiritual nature of their self is connected with the use of entheogens. And, it translates into the modern world. We have a responsibility to understand the nature of the self. So the idea of the third eye is associated with that pineal gland, but it doesn't mean that if you would take entheogens, you're illuminated. But it is related to the third eye and consciousness. So the eye of Horus is the left eye because it's associated with right brain, which is spiritual. Jesus said, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. And again, I'm not talking about the use of entheogens because the ancient elders their shaman would not be given rites of passage until they had their sacrament. And then they would be given rites of passage because they would know what their work was to do, which is to reactivate that pineal gland through knowledge. Not the pineal gland, but the third eye chakra, through knowledge. And I know I'm not explaining this right, but just to show you the importance of this pineal gland, here we find it in the Vatican Square, and the peacocks were the guardians of the spiritual realm. And then we find it on the wand of Hermes, with the raised Kundalini energy of the serpents. Here we find it in the Buddha, associated with the pine cone, which is associated with the crown chakra, not the pineal gland. Okay, so I don't want to confuse the two, but it is associated with coming into balance and turning on that third eye. And this is not Buddha. This is Ahura Mazda. And this is a monotheistic anthropomorphized deity. So any religion with a fully anthropomorphized monotheistic deity is a ritual in an advanced form. And in the Vedas, or the Vedic text, there are two traditions. In one we have the nature cult, and in the other we have a conscious resistance to the gods of nature. So a fully anthropomorphized monotheistic deity here, coined Ahura Mazda by Zoroaster. This reveals that both are a throwback to a much more ancient nature cult. And the so-called wise men of today have made a mistake that the ancients wouldn't have made, which is that they have confused and construed propitiation of ancestry with propitiation of elemental powers. Man, I just can't do this. If we don't understand astrotheology, we really cannot understand what's really taking place here. And I've already spoken too long. We're nearing midnight, so all I'm going to be able to do is give you the 20 ways, because I've just taken too much time and I'm too tired to explain this. I was supposed to go on at 7 o'clock, and I can see I've got like minimum another hour. And but this is the very first symbol that was venerated.
Yeah, we could continue tomorrow if you guys want to.
What about Eric?
Eric will be here. It's about Ryan being here to record audio. That's no problem though. We can record audio without him. So that's up to you guys though. Because I was going to postpone mine till tomorrow because it's too late so these bands can play.
Yeah, because that one band was getting ready to leave.
Yeah. So we can adjourn until tomorrow. That's up to you. Or us.
I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it all, but I thought I'd at least get to these.
I'm sure some of the people here would like to, you know.
How long have I been speaking already in the second half?
1 hour. More than an hour.
More than an hour?
Yeah, we want to see
Damn
all
it.
this.
Well,
Get it on tape, Doug.
I'm going to just give you the 20 ways that the ancients displayed the superior knowledge. And, I told you it was an 8-hour presentation, and I tried to do it in 2. The 20 ways are that the grandparents raised their children and the adults handle the social affairs. They did not anthropomorphize naters or deities. They attempted to preserve knowledge in the mythos as a sacred science connected with the evolution and preserving the prehistoric past. They built the pyramids and the Sphinx. I tried to explain that. They divinized the night sky. They stored knowledge by means of myth. They used seed truth method, understood the dangers of institutionalized belief and dogma and groupthink. They understand the dangers of socialism and capitalism. They staged exoduses out of the Nile Valley at different phases of the evolution and ascension. They built a civilization with a single task and different talents to lend to a single task. They endeavored to store the knowledge in the way that they did. They intermingled. No monetization, barter, and no intellectual property. They developed mystery traditions, ancient psychology. They stored knowledge using archetypal forms and created correlations on the grounds of likeness. They understood the responsibility of bringing the knowledge to the information. They understood the dangers of spoken languages. They understood how we evolve as a species. They held the seed to be sacred. Agriculture was a driver for better tools and knowledge of the cycles, and the seed was the provider of life if properly cultivated. They kept mythos intact with the science and prehistoric past. They recognized principles first. They used communion method of the sacrament before giving rites of passage. They discovered processional cycles and divinized the hero in correspondence with the totemic rites. They used basic forms that are familiar and present in the social in societal collapse. So if we go back to basics, we find those forms. They use sign and symbol as a language and develop languages. And modern languages cause a reduction in symbolism, understanding the archetypal realm. Knew how to evolve the species and prevent stagnation. They created the longest lasting civilization that ever existed on Earth, and it was over 300,000 years. And they valued the intuitive capacities and intellect over physical strength and ability. And there was no social Darwinism. So, man, there's no way I could have got all that done. That was the end of it. And this was bonus stuff I just wanted to throw. But it's past my bedtime.
I'm just too tired to really extrapolate this stuff. I remember I was supposed to go on at 7, so please bear with me.